because who doesn't have a bar cabinet at home, huh, Frank Corrado? What's in your bar cabinet?
What's going on,
bar,
boys?
as regular people call it.
We used to have like one of those, what do you call it, like a trolley, a cart?
Oh, really?
Like a bar, a bar cart. I guess that's what you would call it. It no longer exists in like the normal, floor plan because we had to baby-proof the house. So it's in like a closet, and if we ever need to get at it, which we do need to get at it, it's a bit of a
going
mission
into the closet.
Very swinging 70s of you, Frankie. Yes. Bar carts to push around your entertaining space, lest anyone need a...
Then they put the shag down, and now it doesn't go...
Libations, anyone?
Yes, exactly. Cubed, crushed, what kind of ice? Frank, where would these Canucks players be watching St. Louis win game after game after game after game? Would they be frustrated like us fans and media, or would they be, no, we put ourselves in this spot and this is what we deserve?
Oh, I'm sure they would be frustrated. Like you always want to remain in the fight, right? Like I don't care how bad it's gone. You always think you have a chance, and until you're mathematically eliminated. But what St. Louis is doing is wild. It is wild what's going on there. I was just there actually calling the Habs game early last week. And Holloway was incredible. That top six has been cooking, and it's interesting. Have you guys done like the draw comparisons to the year they won the cup to this year thing with St. Louis? I'm getting asked that all the time.
Not win by win, but tell us about it.
No, but it feels different, right? Because I feel like that was more of a veteran team that was underachieving at the time. And while there's a lot of vet guys on the blue line for the St. Louis team, it's the young guys. It's Kyrou, it's Thomas, it's Neighbors, it's Holloway. It's like this next like up and coming wave that has really kind of taken this team and brought it to where they're going. Not to mention, Jordan Binnington was personally offended by Blake Price's comments during the Four Nations, and he took that to heart. Sure. And now he's riding an unbelievable heater. So like that's a serious team. I think if you're Vancouver, of course you look at it and you're frustrated, but you got to say like, you win that many games in a row in the fashion they're doing it, you tip your cap to them.
Well,
Frank, it was you, me, and Mrs. Binnington. That was it in Jordan Binnington's
We rode together.
During the four. Absolutely.
Yeah.
We did ride together.
With regards to the frustration of the Canucks, like if they were 8-2, we'd still be going, the Blues are red hot. You'd still be commenting on how well they've been playing, but that difference of 4 points is everything. Like if the Canucks were 3 points back of the Blues right now, it'd be full steam ahead for the Canucks play, but you'd still be saying, hey, the Blues are playing lights out. By going that perfect 10-0, they've been just good enough that they've almost put it to rest already. Like it's razor thin margins, and the difference between lights out and merely very, very good is the difference right now.
Yeah. And it's crazy that Jim Montgomery was fired by the Bruins this year because they thought that was going to fix things. And look what he did. Look what he did in St. Louis. Like he completely revamped the way that team plays defense. Like they're one of the best defensive teams in the NHL by every metric that you can imagine. They are a top third to a top 10 team. And so that was a wild miscalculation in Boston to let Montgomery go, thinking that was the issue. But that's to the gain of the Blues. And they've been great. And I think we always kind of come back to all the different things that went wrong for Vancouver this year. The fact that they're in this spot, like we wouldn't have predicted this. At the end of last year, in the summer, at the start of this year, the outlook looked way more rosy than it's been. But there's going to be some work to be done. It's not over yet. You still have to play the games. But just with the way St. Louis is playing, it feels like the hope is dwindling here as the games go on.
But that was eminently predictable. Everybody said when he was leaving Boston, that's a good coach leaving. And he's
St. Louis fired their coach to hire him. Like right. you don't see these moves often, but they happen from time to time.
And so to dovetail that back to the Canucks, as we look at the future of Rick Tocchet, you do have to make the calculation. Like if it doesn't work with Rick Tocchet, got to make sure that you've got a replacement here because the grass is not always greener, and which means ante up if you're the Vancouver Canucks and pay the man.
It is interesting, the coach thing, because I follow a lot of Ottawa, and Travis Green is going to get some love for Coach of the Year for what he's done there. And I think he deserves to be in the top 3 to 5 of that conversation because of what, that group didn't change a ton. Like the core guys remain the same outside of the trade deadline move where Norris goes out and Cousins comes in, and he turned them into a very good defensive team. And, the years that he was here, if you looked at some of the lineups he had to work with, there were some ugly nights. There was some stuff where you're like, that's a training camp roster, and he's got to ice that for a legit NHL game. And so, if you want to take that to what Rick Tocchet, has had to go through this year, whether it's been, goalie hurt, star player, star forward, $11.6 million not playing to that level, feud between him and the other star forward that's here, like all these different things, like that weighs over Rick Tocchet's ability to coach the team. So like it is hard to get a read on him this year. And I think, from last year to this year, the Canucks went from being one of the most, call it like easily watchable, most exciting teams to watch to, I would bet that there's people who like watch hockey who would have the Canucks on like a do not watch list this year outside of watching Quinn Hughes. Seriously. Yeah. And that's like, I don't think that all falls on Rick Tocchet. And so if you want to like play the game where you don't want to bring him back, that's fine. But, he might go somewhere else and have a ton of success. He may not, but there's a chance that he could. And Travis Green did that this year in Ottawa and is having success, and he's going to the playoffs.
I would quibble with you about the coach of the year stuff, but it's not worth it.
Carberry's going to win.
We'll just move. Yeah, exactly. We'll just move on.
It's a formality. Carberry's going to win.
Right.
And then after that, like, Montgomery probably deserves votes.
Well, Montgomery deserves votes, but like for me, my ballot might be entirely in the West after Carberry, because I think Arneal deserves credit in Winnipeg. I think Hiller in Los Angeles and in Vegas as well.
Yeah.
Deserves credit. And then, Montgomery in St. Louis. So, and frankly, even Ryan Huska. And the point totals of the teams in the West are all superior to those of Ottawa and Montreal, and to me, the other candidates in the East. But nevertheless, Frank.
Yeah, fair enough. But just to jump in there, doesn't it feel like the West is like who wants to make the playoffs the most, and in the East it's like who's just gonna get in?
Yeah, exactly. Like I was pleased to see the Senators actually go on a run and carpe diem there, because there were so many teams and it seemed like, okay, does anybody want to go to the playoffs in the East? How different or similar is Mike Sullivan hockey and the way he wants to play from what you've seen from Tocchet here in Vancouver?
Oh, it's a good question, because I think Sully's a great coach, and I think there's a part of Sully where it's not like he wants to be like doesn't want to be high risk Sully, but he's had to live in a world where he had Malkin on a line, Kessel on a line. Of course, he's always had Crosby, and he's always like, when the teams were really good, he had a very responsible, kind of fourth line. But I guess what I'm saying is like he has had some like offensive players that he had to let them be themselves and not kind of stifle that, and he did that, and he had success with it, and you made the right balances on each line. Like you had Nick Bonino playing with Phil Kessel and Carl Hagelin, because that worked. Like there was two guys with a more defensive kind of conscience out there. So, like, I think Sully is, like, you have to earn his trust for sure. Like, he doesn't just let you, like, you don't just get his trust. So there's a little bit of caution that way. But, he wants you to make plays. Like, I think with Sully, if you're going to make a mistake making a play. Don't make a mistake, just trying to play it uber safe. And, like, you have to find the right time to do that stuff. But, yeah, I think Sully's a great coach in a weird situation right now in Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
Like that team's not going anywhere anytime soon, and he is a great hockey mind trying to guide them through it. It's a weird, bizarre hockey life right now for him.
Well, I bring him up just because we presume that if Tocchet is not going to be here, that Sullivan would be at the top of the Canucks wish list. Do you think that's fair?
I don't know. Like Sully feels like he's so deeply embedded in the whole Pittsburgh fabric there, right? Like he was in charge, or he was part of the group that was doing the general manager search. which is crazy to think that the head coach is involved in that with the Fenway Sports Group. Like, so it feels like this is what I mean about it being bizarre in Pittsburgh. It's like Fenway's there. Sully was in charge, or he was part of the process for picking the GM. How does the GM fire him? And then Crosby's still going to be there because it sounds like he doesn't want to go anywhere. So how does anything really change there?
Yeah.
So I guess that brings me to Vancouver. It's like, well, if you want Mike Sullivan, you better be willing to pay the Babcock price or the John Cooper price, or you know what I mean? Like, it's going to have to be a huge number, because similar to how Montgomery was hired, 5 days after he got fired, I think Sullivan falls into that category as well, where if it's like you got a guy that you think is okay and you got a little money to spend, you're going to fire that guy and hire Mike Sullivan.
Is
and
there any
you've
chance
done
of
that
Sullivan
years ago.
Is there any chance of Sullivan and Crosby? Do you think you could swing that in any way, shape, or form? Would he follow him?
He makes fun of me for this. He asked tongue-in-cheek, but I think there's a world where Sidney Crosby could be in Vancouver one day.
So you know what's funny? Like, I do this show.
We've had this conversation with you, Frank, and I know you've poo-pooed it as well. I know where your lines, but I'm just
here's the thing. I've opened up my horizons a little bit on this.
Oh,
and I'll tell you why. Sidney Crosby has done everything. He's won Stanley Cups. He's won individual awards, Olympic golds. He's done literally everything. He has not done this. He hasn't played for his childhood team, the Montreal Canadiens. But to bring Vancouver into the mix, he has never played for a Canadian market. And we know there's some people here very familiar to him. And so, obviously you make the connection. But I've been thinking now, like, Crosby's still playing at such a high level. So the question is not, are teams going to call on Crosby? The question is, are teams going to call on Crosby and give up a piece that they think is going to be a 10-year plus NHL player to Pittsburgh because that's what they need in return for him? And you're going to get 2 to 3 years of Crosby, and the Penguins are going to get a 10-year, really solid NHLer. That's, I think, the conversation that you have to be willing to have, and you have to have a stockpile, of that type of stuff. Or maybe you don't. Maybe you're willing to part with it for 2-3 years of Sid. But that's why I was looking at Montreal and thinking, they have a stockpile and they have picks. And that's like, not that I think it's going to happen, but if I could ever conjure it up, I was looking more that way.
And I hear you, and I think that's fair. I just think the owner, the president of hockey operations, the GM, and the current head coach would absolutely, in a heartbeat, move that young player and future assets out to have 2 to 3 years of Sidney. I want to get back to what you were saying about Sully adapting to the offensive talent in his midst. Did I hear, or am I reading too much into it, Tocchet hasn't yet done that with Pettersson and some of his offensive players?
I mean, I guess when you hear like that you want to reprogram how the guy, plays and thinks and processes like that, it's not going to call it a red flag. What do the kids call it? A beige flag? Like it's something. It's there, like it's on the radar. But coaches think that way, so that's fine.
It's maroon.
Yeah, and
orange.
like Pettersson hasn't had a great season, so you got to work with him. You got to coach him, and the player has to want to be coached. So I can understand it. But I think there are some guys that you just have to not let them be, but like let them use their skill sets, because that is what separates them. And you almost like that's the kind of stuff that you can't overcoach or you can't overteach. Like, we can talk about a neutral zone forecheck, we could talk about defensive zone structure, but when it comes to some of the creativity, it's like that's where guys got to have a little free reign, and they may turn it over every once in a while at the blue line. Just you got to kind of ingrain it into their heads that like, okay, weigh your risk versus your reward for me, please, and just walk me through it. And if this play went well, what was the reward? And what was the risk? And like that, I think that's how you got to approach this type of thing. You can't take the puck out of those kinds of guys' hands, because then you don't get the best version of the player. Yeah, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and game situation, like if you're down a goal in the third, yeah, okay, that's worth the risk. If we're up too late in the third, no, that's absolutely not worth.
Do you think Rick Tocchet could kick the can and say, you guys have got until July 2nd. I need to see what the plan is. I need to see what this roster looks like. I need to see if I have a second line center.
I could see that. Yeah, I think he has. I think he has the ability for a couple reasons. Because he would be a highly coveted coach around the league, and it's not ideal for other teams to go into July and not have a coach named, but you could do it. And B, like I'm sure he's quite comfortable saying, if I have to take a year off and go work for TNT, I don't know this to be a fact, obviously, but hey,
He's got that in his
I'm
arsenal.
sure that's always in the back pocket.
Yep.
Right. So for him, he kind of does control his destiny to a certain degree, so he should be comfortable with it, and he's earned that right. Like if there was a team, let's say Philadelphia, that wanted to have Rick Tocchet as their coach next season, you could bring him in July, full well knowing that, it's not going to be a playoff year. There's a long-term vision in mind, so it's like, it is a little bit of a get up and running type situation. So that's where you're like, yeah, sure, I can wait till July 2nd, July 15th to see what you guys, what you're going to put on the table for me. I think that's fair for him.
I don't know, guys. Like, that would mean the Vancouver Canucks are without a head coach on July 1st. And free agents want to know who's the coach.
I'm not saying they would be comfortable with it. I think he would be comfortable with it.
Yeah, I just,
June 28th, post-draft?
The end date of the contract is June 30th.
Yeah.
The decision has to be made by June 30th.
I guess they would have to know whether or not they plan on making noise at the draft to acquire their first-line center or their second-line center. And maybe they could wait that late. I don't know. He, meanwhile, is getting a little bit testy towards the end of this season because, he's not making the playoffs, it doesn't appear.
This was a different kind of testy, too.
He had just answered questions about Elliot Friedman's report and his contract. The next question was on the use of Jonathan Lekromacki.
And I think he held his testiness in check during the contract question.
Yes.
And it seeped out during the Lekromacki question.
And, I've got no problem with the way that they've used Lekromacki to this point. He's not getting 6 minutes a game. Like, he's generally 10 to 12 minutes a game.
Yep.
You could quibble that there's isolated incidents where you would have liked to see when the Canucks need a goal, him out there. But for the most part, not crazy.
Should have been the first shooter in Columbus. But
the question going forward, with the playoffs such a remote possibility, should you just put him out more, sink or swim? Or as long as the mathematical chances are still there, you keep on keeping on?
It's a good one because I feel like I've been in this situation as a player where, like, you're the young prospect and the team may or may not make the playoffs, or it feels like a long shot. I kind of think you probably play them, like, this is how I think it should, like, it would play out, and it will probably play out. You're playing him the amount that you thought you would as if you're in the fight, because nothing really changes. And maybe once you're mathematically eliminated, you probably have that conversation with your GM where you're going to say, listen, this guy's part of our long-term plans. Let's try and, like, the pressure's off everyone, play him more. And we have nothing to lose. We actually have more to gain by kind of getting him some confidence here and giving him more looks. But, like, you use the word giving. Like, you can't just give and give and give. You do have to earn it to a certain degree. And I feel like as long as there's still a little bit of fight left in the team, like, you're operating as usual until that day comes and there's an E next to your name in the standings. And then you're like, okay, that E doesn't mean eliminated. That E means evaluation for next year. And then you're putting them in that situation more.
Last question from me. We discussed this in the opening block, and of course, we are very familiar with the context and the nuance and the history between these two. So I just want to read, no question here, I just want to read it to you flatly.
Okay.
And you tell me what you think. Tocchet has asked about Pettersson's injury yesterday. He says, upper body injury, day-to-day. Quote, when a guy's day-to-day, you expect him to play, but I don't know the discomfort level. He then goes on to inform he skated once or twice, but didn't skate that hard because of a little bit of discomfort.
Yeah, that sounds
presented
like a
without
frustrated
comment.
Coach. It sounds like a frustrated coach, man. It sounds like a coach that is tired of, whatever has been the case with Pettersson, and definitely has a more old school, kind of rigid mentality when it comes to these types of things. And that probably isn't Pettersson. Like, Pettersson probably just can't play through some of the stuff that Tocchet would be able to, or maybe he's seen some guys, be able to play through. It's hard because we speculate on these things and we don't know all the nuances. We hear one side, we hear the other side. And I think just to provide some context, right? Like Tocchet was the assistant coach for the Penguins when they're going on Stanley Cup runs. And like, there's, guys are laying it on the line. Guys are getting shot up before games. Like guys are playing with injuries that result in surgeries at the end of the year. And so, when you've seen that and that's what it takes to win, and you don't see your best guy, like the guy that you're essentially going to like live and die with, going forward, willing to gut it out. And this is, I'm presuming this is what Tocchet thinks. It's like, yeah, like it would be frustrating for sure. But us three kind of like observers, we don't know the details.
No, we don't.
Right?
We don't.
I just know like that's what this guy has seen, and he knows that's what it takes to win, and it's hard to win. And
his best forward or erstwhile best forward has not been in the lineup for must-win games. So I understand it. Frank, you're the best. Thank you for this, and we will catch up. We'll catch up next week when hopefully your horizons have broadened a little further on this Sidney Crosby too.
And hopefully the St. Louis Blues have lost a game too. By that
I'm winning
point.
People over, Blake. It's like Wingspan. Slowly but surely, I will win them over.
I think the Penguins are doing you favors to winning people over because they're playing so bad.
It is one of the greatest players in the history of the game really going down like this, where he is going to spend close to 10 years in a losing environment.
If Sidney Crosby is wearing a Canucks jersey next season, I'm buying the two of you the greatest steak dinner you've ever had.
I want more than that. I want something embarrassing on camera.
More than that. He said, "Wow."
I think I'll leave you with this. If Sidney Crosby is playing for a different team ever in his career, the goal call will be in another language. Elebu.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I could see it.
Maybe it works better in Pittsburgh if they trade him to Montreal. They can say to their fans, he grew up a Habs fan.
He needed to go
It's
home.
the most storied franchise. But I'm still holding out hope for our market.
Yeah.
Crosby is a Canuck.
Thanks, Frank.
See you, boys.